what we hear now is da 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 ba ba da, right?
Yeah.
Da 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 ba ba da. But on yours, Randy, I remember I always thought it was ba da 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 ba ba da. But I actually keep playing the riff. Da 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 ba ba da 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 ba ba da 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 ba ba da. Right. So
Yeah.
I thank you, Josh, for sending that over, because for 40 years now I've completely forgotten that's really what is there, and it was there. It was just a mute when Paul Lanny did it. He just muted it, but that was what the bass part was.
The David Ellefson Show. Featuring Grammy Award winner David Ellefson and respected metal journalist Joshua Toomey. Presented by EllefsonEmporium.com. Here is David and Joshua.
Well, hey, welcome to the show. David here,
right.
Josh, and longtime friend Randy Burns, producer Randy Burns. Probably well known to many of us, including myself, as the producer of the Megadeth Peace Sells But Who's Buying album. Dude, good to see you, man.
Yeah.
When was it? Did we went through El Paso on the Kings of Thrash tour last year? Was that the last time that we saw each other?
Yes. Yeah. We met up down there in El Paso.
I think it was. There's so many times that where I'd be somewhere and people go, "Hey, Randy Burns was here," or "Randy Burns is here," and then I come out to find you, and it's like, "Oh, you already left." Or it seemed like our paths would almost cross so many times, maybe at NAMM or a handful of different places like that.
I did show up at the Kings of Thrash show in Orange County when Chris played with you.
Oh, then that was probably one of them. Yeah, for sure.
But I didn't see you.
Yeah, I didn't see you either.
For whatever reason.
So it's been outside
into Pamela Parker though.
Okay.
Parks.
Yep.
Pamela
So
Parks.
outside of El Paso, it's been a minute for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
1986, let's call it, right?
Yeah.
So man, so it's so funny. I was just with Chris Poland a couple weeks ago. We did one of my solo bass story shows together. He and I appeared at a Comic-Con called Terrificon in Connecticut at Mohegan Sun, and we did some Q&A sessions. He always brings you up. Of course, he just loves you dearly as a friend and as a producer, and because you guys are working on you're remixing. Is it Metalopolis or something? Return to Metalopolis,
right? Yeah. A couple of years ago, I convinced Chris to dig out the tapes, which he had the foresight of obtaining when his record deal fell apart.
Yeah.
And he didn't think much about it, but I got him to dig them out. We got them transferred to digital, and then I started working on the remixes, and he's real happy with what I came up with. He was really surprised. It sounds very, very different.
Well, Randy, let's do some housekeeping real quick and kind of go back to what got you into producing engineering, and then kind of how you got into working the Suicidal Tendencies, and then obviously going on to producing Possessed and Megadeth and all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, I play guitar. I moved to California to be a rock star. Like lots of people. And I ended up playing in cover bands in Orange County, and that was a lot of fun. And somewhere along the line, I hooked up with this Linda Schultz, and the two of us wrote a bunch of songs, and we started working on an original band. And at some point we got signed to a management contract, and the chemistry wasn't really right in the band. The band was a lot heavier than she was. She was more like Stevie Nicks or, a Fleetwood Mac kind of level. And the band was more like Rainbow, and, so okay. It was a little bit of a mismatch. Anyway, our drummer, Mark Drubay, quit our band and joined Survivor. And then the management company wanted to sue Mark for breach of contract, and I told them I wouldn't do that, so they fired me too. And so along the same period of time when I was doing all that, I bought a TIAC 8-track machine, put it in my parents' garage, and recorded all the demos for Linda and I. And through that process, some people heard I was doing this, and a friend of ours had a punk band, and he brought his punk band over, and he said, "Will you record my punk band?" I said, "Sure." So I did it, and they liked it. And then they told Steve Sinclair. And shortly after that, I did a few other little punk rock bands, and then Linda and I opened up a little 8-track studio in a storefront. And Steve Sinclair and Ron Gowdy. Do you know Ron?
I know of Ron. Where would I know his name? By the way, Steve Sinclair, who you're referring to, he was the artist or the A&R guy for Combat Records.
That's correct.
Yeah, so everyone makes the connection here. But Ron Gowdy, I know the name. Where would I know him from?
He was same gig at Enigma. He signed Poison and Guar and
Poison and Guar.
Well, which is an interesting fact, because Poison from Enigma and Megadeth from Combat basically walked in the door of Capitol Records at like the exact same time. And it was funny. And I've read this history too about how somehow the Enigma catalog got brought. And that's why I was wondering about Leatherwolf. I thought they were on Enigma. So anyway, we digress. Continue with your story. Anyway.
So Steve Sinclair and Ron Gowdy were in a punk band together called Modern Warfare. But they decided to make a compilation of a bunch of punk bands from the Long Beach and LA area and Orange County. And they came to me and made me an offer, just a little bit of money to make this record. And so that's what we did. And there were a bunch of pretty famous bands on there later on. Social Distortion, it was one of their first recordings. Anyway, the recordings were really good. People really liked it. It was called Hell Comes to Your House, was the compilation. And it got around. So Lisa Fancher, who was at Frontier Records, had Christian Death. Christian Death was over at Frontier, and she had Suicidal Tendencies, and she heard what I did with Christian Death on Hell Comes to Your House and gave me Suicidal Tendencies. So basically it all started with Steve Sinclair and Ron Gowdy bringing me this compilation, and we did a good job. They were producers and I was the engineer, and we did it in my little 8-track studio in Orange County, and it was a good record. It was fun.
Now, what year was that? Because we engaged in 1986. So what year was this?
1980. 80, okay. I think, yeah. And I think Suicidal Tendencies was 81 or 82.
Okay.
Right in. It was pretty quickly followed after that.
So interesting. So obviously we signed to Combat Records in 84. Killing Is My Business comes out in 85, sells $8,000 budget, modest sales, who knows what the hell they really were, to be honest with you. In fact, I remember we were always wondering, why is it always just short of $500,000 so we can get a gold record? Because that was why the remixes happened. I look up, I go, why is there no gold record on my wall, right? And I remember talking to management about it. Yeah, for some reason, it's 50,000 short. Ironically, I think, how is that? Did the 50,000 records just fall off the back of a truck somewhere? I don't know. I've talked to other Mike Schnapp and other people around. That was a very different day of the music business, New York, and all that stuff. So who knows? Maybe that's why it never made gold. But whatever. So we have a meeting with Steve Sinclair, who's now doing A&R, who's basically the liaison between the artist and a record label is their role. And so he takes us to Cantor's on Fairfax, the delicatessen. We have our meeting. We find out we're going to get $25,000 to do this next record, and he brings your name up. We had not heard of you, but it was like, okay, this is who he wants to do it. And it was And so you're brought into the mix. You weren't at that meeting, were you, on Cantors? Okay. So this is where your name got into the mix. Okay, so your name comes up, and you're brought in through Steve Sinclair. What do you remember about how we sort of met, how we engaged, and we obviously started the recording down at the Music Grinder on Melrose and all that? What do you remember about sort of the inroads to Megadeth?
Well, at the time, I was not real happy with the music business. I'd done a bunch of records, and it was kind of all getting the same. It was a lot, and I took some time off. I went to live with my parents, and I was actually going to school in with Cal State Northridge and Antelope Valley Community College, studying computer science and math. And Steve called me. He said, "Hey, I got this band, and you need to do them." I'm like, "Oh, come on, Steve." So, and he goes, No. You've got to do this band. You're the only guy who I want to do it. Go down and take a listen to them, and then tell me what you think." So, again, I'm living in Antelope Valley. So I drive to LA. You guys were in some kind of rehearsal studio. And I came down and I sat on the floor, and you guys played the set, no vocals, just played the music. And literally sitting there on the floor, I realized this is a hit record. This is my thing. I get to make a hit record, And so I quit school, moved to Hollywood, got an apartment, and we started recording. So, and that's the only time I've ever had any thought like that. I heard you guys play through the set, and it was just so obvious that it was so good. And you guys were on fire. You just came back off the road.
Yeah,
and,
right.
You were on. It was
and it's interesting. I did the same thing and moved to Hollywood. We start Megadeth. So that the music seems to have this effect on people. You give up your career ambitions, school, sell everything, join Megadeth. And it seems to be the thing, right?
Well, yeah.
So,
no.
And you look, when you hear what is great, that's the effect it has, right? And it had that obviously on many of us. So so yeah, that would have probably been downtown in our rehearsal place in downtown LA. And so I remember we had come off the road. I've told this story many times. Our agent Andy Summers put us out on the road for about a month to just go. We needed to probably make a little money, but we played every song we had, which was "Killing Is My Business" and what you heard sitting on the floor, which would become the Peace Sells record. I remember Combat. We knew, as you probably heard too, when we played the song "Peace Sells," even live, you could just tell that was a hit song, right? It was a hit. And I remember Combat fighting with Combat because they wanted to call the record "Wake Up Dead." When we turned it in, we're like, "Oh my God, please! This is so obvious." They were thinking like a metal "Wake Up Dead." It's metal, like they're thinking like that. We were thinking metal, but obviously higher levels. Like we've got the goods on this record. Like we really have the goods for this to become something greater than just another also ran thrash record. What do you remember about some of those early days and maybe some of your interchanges and exchanges with the label? Was there because Steve said you're the guy. I mean, there was no other guy brought to the table. There wasn't even a negotiation. Like, no, Randy Burns is going to cut this record, and that is what it is. And that was just decided, So
well, I do remember talking to you guys about it, and somebody said you did Suicidal, right? And I said yes. I said, well, then you're okay with us, It was kind of a. It was a moment.
Because they were a cool band. I mean, they even had they had a little hit on Institutionalized, was kind of a little hit on MTV, So look, we open up the fund. We're in. I don't remember doing any pre-production really, right? I just remember going pretty much right into the Music Grinder. We started cutting tracks live off the floor. We took all the drum tracks live. Me and Dave and Gar playing together out in the room as a band. Maybe Chris as well. And then
of you there.
We had all of us there. And then I remember we spent 2 days, I think, kind of recutting some bass tracks, kind of just because we could tighten them up. Now, here's something I want to ask you. So we, I think, had already cut the scratch tracks. I was starting to recut bass, which I remember took, I think, 2 evenings or something to kind of rip through them. Casey McMacken was the engineer. We had a Peterson strobe tuner, and you could tune these things 90 cents flat or sharp, right? Depending, there's a wheel, right? I seem to remember going to the tuner and realizing the thing was 90 cents flat, right? So we were not quite E flat. We definitely weren't A440 standard. We weren't E flat. We were somewhere right in between, closer to E flat. And I seem to remember asking you guys, going, "Oh shit, like we're not in tune, like we're off, right?" And asking you guys, "What do we do? Do we recut? Do we go?" And I think you or Casey or somebody said, "Nah, fuck it. Like, we don't have time. We don't have the money. We're too far in. Like, just keep going," right? And
Yeah, well, what's the point anyway? I mean, who cares if you're a quarter step down or
But it was so. Think about this, Randy.
As long as we can make all the rest of it the same, right?
Yeah, of course, as long as we all stick to that. But
tuners, right?
But that album has this haunting darkness to it, this very witchy, just evil, fucking dark sound to it. That obviously is because of the music, but that pitch has created that, right? It certainly has lended a helping hand, I think. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's that, and it's the drums in the back room. It's here and there on the different versions of it, but I think that the darkness comes from the drums being in that big room with a wood ceiling and brick walls, and at least to me, and yeah, there is a feeling about it. It's got a vibe,
Yeah. David, you had talked about Dimebag and them telling you that Peace Cells changed his life, and Pantera actually tuned to that 426 or whatever it is. Like that's
no
why, like,
shit.
That's when you hear like
wow,
a Pantera cover band or whatever. It sounds a little funny if they don't tune to that. Like, they're just a hair off. Yeah, that's
yeah. The first time I met the band Pantera and Dime, we were drinking all night, whatever. And this was 1988, and he stopped me and he just put his hand on my shoulder and goes, "Brother, Peace Cells changed my life." And I was just kind of like, man, thanks, bro. And he goes, "No." And he looked me dead in the eye. He goes, "No, Peace Cells changed my life." And it was one of those, sobering moments, right? Yeah. 10 drinks into the night, you're like, wow, okay, thank you, man. Then they invited me up on stage the next night to jam with them. And so it's funny you talk about the drums, because then the next record, So Far So Good So What, we're back in the Music Grinder. Paul Laney's producing. Mutt Lange is all the rave. So unlike what we did on Peace Cells, which is lean and mean, everybody in the room, musical conversation between us, cutting tracks, getting that vibe. The next record, it was, overdubs. You're playing to the track. You're not playing to each other anymore, right? And drums cut, and then drums with no cymbals, and then cymbals with no drums, and that whole feeling you just talked about was completely gone. And while it was a good attempt at trying to create this sort of really clean kind of record, it also, in my opinion, is one of the I would call it a flaw in that record, and look, you don't know, you go for these things, you try new things, whatever, you're running up the flagpole. Sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss. I think your punk rock sensibilities certainly got the band in the room. We made the record the only way we knew how, which is the four of us together as a band, right? And
well, we ended up overdubbing everything except the drums. I mean, we kept all I was looking for on those first 4 days of tracking were the drum performances, but we didn't use a click track. And Gar was fucking amazing. You guys had these songs with like 4 parts, and so here's groove 1 with tempo 1. Here's groove 2 with tempo 2. And then here's, and he would move between those two things so beautifully. And of course, you guys are all great players. So you were tight with it. You knew where you were going when okay, now we're going to go over here, and you'd follow Gar. But eventually, though, you had to go back and we overdubbed all the guitars, and you had to play to that track. But the initial track was, they were exciting. They were really good takes. We spent a lot of time getting really good drum takes. And if you remember, I drug you guys into the control room and made you listen to pretty much just the drums for the whole song a bunch of times before you said, yeah, that one's good.
Yeah. How many takes did we do of each song? Did we do 3 takes, or did we just do 1? If we liked it, we kept it. If we didn't, we went back and recut it. How did we do that?
I don't remember. There were a few of each one. I don't think we did any of them in 1 take, but everybody seemed to agree when the feeling was right. Everybody went, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. We got to keep that one, and we move on. We did all the drums and some of the bass in 4 days. I remember that for sure.
Yeah, I remember that too. Yeah, because I remember I came in the evenings. Look, Music Grinder was an expensive room. It was what, $1,500 a day, which was a lot of money when you only got $25,000, right, to cut a record, right?
That was kind of my formula. How I made those records for cheap was I spent a lot of money on the drums and tracking them at Music Grinder. I also rented the drums from the Drum Doctor.
Yeah,
and so he brought in the kit, and we used the drummers. In this case, we'd use Gar's hardware, right? His pedals and his hi-hat, but all the rest of the drums would be just like his kit, arranged just like his kit, only they were really, really good drums. So anyway, I spent a lot of money there, and then a little bit at the end to come back and mix in the Music Grinder, and then the rest of it we went into little bitty studios like Mad Dog. I think we spent a lot of time at Mad Dog, and we did some other ones.
Yep, I remember you guys went to Mad Dog. I think that's where you cut a lot of the vocals. You did most of the guitars there, down there. For guitars, because I wasn't there for that. That was just Chris and Dave going in. What did you do? Did you basically just set up their Marshalls and their Rockmans and record, or did you use separate amps? How did that process work?
We rented some amps. We had your guys' Marshalls. We rented some Marshalls, and then we kind of set up like 4 or 5 Marshall cabinets, and then we tried different heads with different cabinets until we found ones that we thought sounded good, and everybody kind of agreed, yeah, that one I like that sound. And then we'd had one sound for Chris rhythms and one sound, a different rig for Dave's, right. And then of course Chris does all that crazy shit like playing a Rockman straight into the board.
I know
it's the perfect example of, you hear this about, guitarists, the sound is in their hands. And I can point to a couple of people like Alan Holdsworth. I mean, if I walked up and played on Alan Holdsworth's guitar, I would sound like me. Right. But if Alan Holdsworth came and played my guitar, he would sound like Alan Holdsworth.
No, Chris is... Yeah, Chris is. I always say that. I mean, literally, I just did a show with him a couple of weeks ago, and while he's down on the pedal board because he used our other guitar player's pedal board, he just jumped up and played a couple songs. As he's at the pedal board, plugging his, hitting his signature. He hits that one note, right, to just sort of get a tone, and it's like every head in the room just goes, "Who's that? Like, what is that sound?" And I mean, it. I just tell people, go, hey, watch this. I just stand back with my buddies, the drummer or whoever, the other singer or something. I just go, check this out. And when they do it, it's just exactly as you said. It's like Alan Holdsworth, it's Eddie Van Halen, it's that signature thing. And one note changes the entire bar, the entire venue, just becomes musical. It becomes this soaring lift. And Chris, who was pretty dark back in those days, he was, as he's talked about, he was in his addiction and everything else, as we all were got down into those roads. And for Chris, who had was a very heavy soul because he's a very thoughtful guy. He's very empathetic. He really, wears his emotions outside of him, and you could see it on him. Yeah, but when he picked up that guitar, you could hear this joy and this sweetness just come through it. Can you talk about that?
I was absolutely blown away by Chris's playing. And when we actually got into the studio, it was even more so. I was just totally enamored with him. And that was a little bit of tension between Mustaine and I. Mustaine noticed that I just loved everything Chris did and didn't particularly get excited about what he did. And it wasn't like a big deal or anything, but he let me know that he didn't appreciate it. He said, I've seen this before. You got polonitis. And
hey, so let's talk about, and to that end, look, Dave put his name on it as a producer, right? And in my mind, Dave was the band member. He was, the primary songwriter. I would argue that a lot of those songs were written in the room together. Dave brought in Peace Cells, the idea, the riffs, but that song, and Chris talked about it the other day in our Q&A. In fact, he brought up things about that harmony, that descending harmony, how he helped puts that together. So I heard things that I didn't even know that Chris did, and Gar was very good about. I remember when he first wrote Peace Cells, the thing was 5 minutes long, and Gar's just like, "We got to cut this song down, man. Come on, we're losing the plot here, And so these things were very band collaborations, and it was one of those groups where those moments were never rewarded, they were never recognized, and certainly never paid for. None of us ever got. But and then when I saw his name on there as a producer, I'm like, producer? It's like Randy Burns was the producer. So what was your relationship just as a producer with Dave? Because to me, it seemed like you were the producer.
Well, I had no problems with Dave. He stayed out of my way. He wasn't pushy about anything.
Mm-hmm.
But he did have a vision of what that record was supposed to be, and so many of the ideas and where things were going to go, and he had all that mapped out. So he's a legitimate producer on it because
okay, cool.
I don't have a problem with that at all. And I think he's a huge force on all the records after that too, where
Mm-hmm.
I mean he's definitely you can see his effect on the record. I mean it's what he had in mind.
Yeah, no, and to that degree, I would 100% agree as far as casting the vision. There always has to be one guy in the band, I've learned, to where the buck stops there, right? Like, hey, we need this take approved. We need this mix approved. Is this vocal take going to be what it needs to be? And to that end, for sure. Like I said, I wasn't down at Mad Dog when you guys were cutting guitars and stuff like that. So,
well, the number one job of a producer is to decide when it's the take, and there weren't any arguments about that with Dave. If one of us was unsure about it, we go back and work on it some more. But there was a lot of it was very easy. It was very easy working with Dave in that sense. But that's what producers do, is they decide when it's a take. The really hard part of producing is when it's not a take, and then you want to try to explain to the artist what they need to do different, or that's the really hard part. So
anyway,
I was going to ask a question. Dave talked about everybody kind of being in their addictions and things like that. Was there any issues, like with drugs, trying to record the record, and maybe somebody came in a little too high, or just kind of had to scrap a day because they're a little bit out of sorts, I guess.
The only effect that I was aware of that the drugs had on sessions, we started late a couple of days, maybe a few hours, because Gar and Chris needed the score, and if they were sick, they couldn't play. And that, I think that happened twice, maybe 3 times, and that's it. We had a couple of late starts. Other than that, I don't think it had much effect on the recording. I don't know, Dave. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I mean, look, I was living with a prostitute in Hollywood, so I needed to get well too, you know. So it's like it was fun for me to go to the studio because I could get out of the cockroach infested apartment that I was crashing in. Because until we got our capital advance, you know, we were beholden to, you know, whoever would let us live with them. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Dave Mustaine slept on my girlfriend's apartment floor several nights. And because he had nowhere to go. Chris had my car most of the time. I gave him my car because he needed to get around and do stuff. Yeah, you guys were definitely pretty much homeless and penniless for the whole time.
I think us and Guns N' Roses were like the original Hollywood gutter snipes, you know, like, you know, because I'd hear the stories from the chicks around town. Oh, Guns N' Roses, there's this sort of fatal fascination with them, you know, and you know, and it just, that's what it was. I mean, you know, there was no handout until you know, again, for them Geffen, for us Capital, you know, once you got your deal, once you got your advance, once you got that, you could finally set up and live kind of like a human being. But, you know, then you'd go on the road and, you know, people say to me all the time about the P-Cells bass line. And I was like, I don't know. I missed it. We were on tour the whole time. Apparently, it was a big hit on MTV, but we were on tour. I missed the whole thing, right. You know.
It was like a decade. It was on MTV.
It was like a decade, and I do remember. You know, we were in Detroit. We had gone through after the album was recorded. We you know, get signed to Capitol. They're setting the record up. We did a tour with King Diamond throughout the summer of 1986. And I remember we did play, I think we had some, we did we were supposed to do 5 dates with Motorhead, and we ended up only doing a couple, and our managers got into a pissing match about the drum riser and stuff. So we had Andy Summers ended up booking another kind of fall 86 tour for us. And I remember going through Detroit, and the P-Cells video was going to be premiering. We shot it at L'Amour's in Brooklyn, but and so a month later, maybe it was going to be premiering on MTV, and we were in Detroit playing the Token Lounge. And I remember sitting in the motorhome. We had an RV, you know, we didn't have a tour bus yet. Sitting in the RV, we said we got to push Showtime back so we could sit and watch the video. And, right?
Of course,
because it was like 12:30. You know, Headbangers Ball was out at like midnight or something, right? And it was coming. So from whatever midnight to 1 a.m. we had to, you know, have a TV available, you know, to watch it. So, but I remember that was. You know, it's like hearing your song on the radio for the first time or two. You know, it's a big deal. You know, it's a thing, you know, so it's funny today. Josh, he sent me your mix. You know, because there's a couple of mixes. There's the Randy Burns mix. There's the Paul Annie mix. And I remember, as I recall, we had signed to Capitol Records. Tom Wally, who then went on to start Interscope and president of Warner Brothers. And, you know, he's had a great career. I've stayed in touch with him a bit over the years. In fact, I think he's at Loma Vista now, which is Ghost's record label. And Tim Carr, who signed us to the label, they thought, well, maybe we'll do a remix on it. So, you know, there's the two versions. Probably the biggest noticeable version is in the song P-Cells. On the chorus, da 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 da, the stop, versus playing through it. And Josh sent me today your version again to remember what it was. Josh, what are your thoughts on it? Because you had some notes about it.
Well, no, I was pulling up the Randy Burns mix and kind of checking it out, and then the one thing that you notice kind of going into the riff is on the remix, you know, there's the stop, but I guess the original version was and like do. It's got a couple extra notes in it, and you know, kind of going back to what you were talking about, you know, the job of a producer telling the guitarist or whoever that that's not the take. You know, how is it for you for them to go, that wasn't the mix? You know, we have to get someone else to mix it. I mean, that as a you know, go ahead.
Well, I don't really like the mixes I did, and it's a result of making bad decisions because we were drinking and doing a lot of drugs. So Casey and I were also fighting about what to do with. There was, you know, it was terrible. I don't like the Paul Lanny mixes. I think the ones Dave did later in 2004 are way better. And there are some things about the mixes I did that I like, but there also there's a bunch of the songs I don't like them at all. So I would like to get another shot at that, and I'm working on that right now.
Yeah,
we'll see what Dave has to say. I'm thinking a remixed version of Peace Cells. I get to do the remix, and he releases it next year for the 40th anniversary. So there's something special about the 40th anniversary.
Interesting. Very cool. Yeah. That's actually a great idea. And Josh, I heard what you heard. So what we hear now is da 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 ba ba da, right?
Yeah.
Da 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 ba ba da. But on yours, Randy, I remember I always thought it was ba da 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 ba ba da. But I actually keep playing the riff. Da 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 ba ba da 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 ba ba da 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 ba ba da. Right. So yeah. I thank you, Josh, for sending that over, because for 40 years now I've completely forgotten that's really what is there, and it was there. It was just a mute when Paul Lanny did. He just muted it, but that was what the bass part was. Right. So that's
right.
That was my musicology education today. So thank you.
Well, I think what I would be looking for if I get to do them again is, first of all, to make them sound like a modern record. Mm-hmm. Records today sound much better than the ones from the 80s. I think we can agree on that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
The digital domain allows you to do things that we just couldn't do then. But the other little element I'd be looking for is as much of that darkness that I experienced in the control room, sitting in the control room at Grindr. I mean, I posted a picture of you guys. Somebody did a post on Facebook about Megadeth, and it's the picture of the four of you right before you did Peace Cells, and then a whole bunch of people commented on it. One guy said it must have been pretty awesome sitting in the producer's chair and listening to that stuff, come through the speakers the first time. And it's like seared into my brain. I can remember every second of it. And I wasn't sitting down. I was standing up because it was so fucking exciting with the four of you out there going through those songs and tracking. I think the thing we did that was good on the record is we captured the energy. That's a really exciting record. And I'd love to do what I did with Chris's record with Peace Cells. So we'll see if that's gonna happen or not.
I think what you captured was a band who was excited. We were excited that we had a second chance because our days with Combat were not so great. Also, we were desperate, not musically desperate. Musically, we were really engaged, and I think really, we knew we were creating something new. And I felt like for us, Peace Cells was Dave's first record away from the shadow of Metallica.
Okay.
For me, I felt like it. And I think the Metallica guys thought the same thing. I mean, not that they ever felt we were in their shadow. I think they always looked at Dave like, dude, you sold 30, 40 million records. That's like being a quarter member of Metallica. What are you complaining about? You know what I mean? Like you did pretty good. But, we all know there's it's a big rock to roll up a big hill, to even sell that many records. So it didn't ever come easy for us, that's for sure. But I felt like, that was the record that, because, first record away from a band is always, he was ex-Metallica. I've made records away from Megadeth, ex-Megadeth, so there's always kind of that shadow, right? And it's just what it is, right? But I felt like Peace Cells stood on its own as its own new sound. We were really coming of age. And I always found with Megadeth, usually a lineup, a manager, a producer would last about 2 records. And then you'd be flushed out, and then it's a new band, it's a new record, it's a new manager. And it's one of the hardest things in Megadeth was to keep consistency, like with Metallica and Iron Maiden and groups that had consistent lineups, consistent managers. And that was frustrating to some degree for sure. But I felt like Peace Sells was that second record. It was the second record with the same band. Ironically, Combat, same, same label. There was, I remember, I always felt with you, because you didn't come straight from a, thrash background, so to speak. You had this punk thing, so you understood us, but you weren't necessarily our direct neighbor coming into it. Like you had a bit of an outside, more worldly view that helped raise us up to something bigger. Did you feel
I
that?
don't know if I get credit for that, but I did have a broad, the stuff I did as an original band would have been more like, Patty Benatar or something like that. It was hard rock. It wasn't really metal. And I always had this pop sensibility. I love pop music. I still like pop music. I listen to all kinds of music. I think he once accused me of not being a real metal guy. And to that, I guilty as charged, you're right. I'm like all over the place. So, I don't think I get credit for lifting you guys up to anything, but maybe just allowing you to get there, not getting in your way.
Yeah. Well, hey, you helped us get $25,000 from Steve Sinclair, and that alone was a huge fucking step. For 1 month, we weren't completely homeless. We were only partially homeless. At least we could borrow your car and sleep on your floor. So
no, that happened. You guys were really hurting on once, except when we were in the studio. But interesting thing about that, when you guys came into Music Grinder, it was a $20,000 record or a $25,000 record with Combat Records, right? And within a few weeks, the phone was ringing off the hook with record companies wanting to talk to Dave. I mean, and everybody that was in earshot of that stuff said, "These are the guys. This is the record. This is what's happening." It was really clear to everybody, anybody who came in contact with it, that you guys were really, really special, and it was a great record.
That's cool. Thank you.
It's funny you say that. You say that you're not a metal guy, or you kind of take that, but it's looking at your career. I mean, you worked on some. You worked on the Possessed record that's technically, considered one of the very first death metal records ever. And you work on Peace Sells and Dark Angel and, a Death record. And, it's like I was telling you before we started recording, it's like you came in, you recorded a bunch of bangers, and then you kind of just dipped out. It was crazy, the career that you had in the 80s and early 90s.
Well, I did the work that came to me. Guns N' Roses didn't call me, so I didn't get that gig. But when I say that, I'm not really a metal guy. I mean, I like all different kinds of music. I play different kinds of music. I heard Nick Menza on a podcast once saying that if there's some genre of music you don't like, that just means that you don't know enough about it yet, and you need to know it and educate yourself, because they're all good, And I thought that was really, really an interesting thing to say, and really well said, So I guess I'm just not exclusively a metal guy. Right. I appreciate lots of different things. Speaking of which, one of the things I'm doing for Chris is doing some mastering of his own rehearsal tapes, which he's going to put out on a record. And there's a bunch of people that are really interested in that. It's it's really incredible, you know. And I'm trying to figure out. I was talking to Chris about the other day, and I said, how do we get metal guys to listen to this? Because I think if they listen to it, they would really like it, you know.
See, I always appreciated that, and I appreciated that about Chris. Look, Chris was always the best bass player in Megadeth. I mean, that guy would pick up a bass. Like, remember the fretless bass? Had this Eagle fretless bass. I think that was actually the one that Dave came up with the Peace Cells riff on. And that Chris would pick up a bass, and I mean, it was like he would bring tears to your eyes. I mean, he was like Jocko, you know. I mean, he just had for him it was his touch, and I always noticed that about after playing with Chris, I realized how people touch an instrument, right? It's in their hands, like you said. The tone is in their hands, and it certainly was with him. I went out of rock and roll as a teenager to listen to jazz music because that's where all the super amazing, superhuman bass players were, you know. The Eddie Van Halens and the Jimmy Pages and Randy Rhodeses, they were all within rock and metal. You know, those guys on bass were over in the jazz world, right? So when Gar and Chris got in the band, I totally spoke their language. I understood their language. I got it. Even though Dave and I were the rock guys and Chris and Gar were the jazz guys, so to speak. But, you know, I think with Ohm, it's the same thing. Like Pag, I remember when those guys came into Mars Studios and rehearsed one Sunday afternoon, because I basically ran Mars Studios so we would have a place to live and you know, have a place to live, have a place to rehearse, right? So I could get us free studio time, right? And sell weed out of the back, whatever, to pay the bills, you know what I mean? Whatever nefarious shit rock bands do, right? And I remember those guys came in one Sunday afternoon to rehearse as the New Yorkers, and that was their band that they had before Chris and Gar. That had disbanded. They kind of got day jobs, and you know, then they joined Megadeth. And seeing Robert Pagliari play bass, he had a BC Rich Eagle, and he took the fingerboard off and he put a piece of glass on it, so it had this fretless glass fingerboard. And I mean, this guy. I mean, it was Percy Jones, Jocko, just, you know, all those guys wrapped into one, man. I mean, and these guys were throwing down. I remember watching Gar play that stuff and just how in the pocket he was. I mean, all of a sudden he became Gene Krupa, you know. And you're right. It's almost like, to use Nick Menz's line, how do we educate metal people to Ohm? I think that's what it is, right? How do we educate them?
And the point I was kind of getting at is that, like, Chris has this other dimension besides being just a metal. He's not just a metal guy. He's a metal guy. He's a fusion guy. He's got like this, you know, almost Holsworth kind of thing that he does. I mean, you've heard him, right? Quite a few times. Yeah, it's really, really amazing stuff. So I think it's good to get out there and listen to lots of different things, you know.
Absolutely.
Well, I certainly think it's great that you're back around. You're out showing your face. You're a legend because of the records you did. You know, as obviously the producer's not the lead singer. You're not the guy on MTV. You're the man behind the scenes. But you know, a lot of the guys that were making these records from years ago, you know, Ron Nevison, Keith Olsen, you know, Chris Sangarides is no longer with us. Max Norman's still around. You know, but a lot of the legends, you know, they're just not around, or they're, you know, not doing this kind of stuff. So I was really glad, Randy, that you agreed to come on and give us some time, because our fans certainly love you, and I've certainly loved the journey we had together and get to continue it on some level together. You know?
Okay. Well, let me do a quick pitch on what I'm doing now.
Please.
A few years ago, about 5 years ago, I decided to not continue working in the computer industry and build a 401k and all that kind of shit. I just quit all of it and said, I want to build a studio and I want to do mixing. I figure, you know, a smart guy with a pair of speakers and a computer can probably do mixing now. I was close. You need a room for the speakers. You need a real room to get accurate stuff out of your speakers, and you need some analog gear. So I've acquired that now. So I've got some SSL gear. I got some Neve gear. You put your mixes through that analog stuff, and you get the sound that you get off a Neve's console or an SSL console. So anyway, And yeah, I've spent a few years learning how to mix. It's a whole specialized art within the recording world. So yeah, I'm looking for, I want to mix really good bands. And that's the trick. I can find lots of bands that will ask me to mix their stuff and pay me to do it. But I'm really looking for good bands. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, if people are interested, get a hold of me. You can find me on Facebook, Randy Burns Producer. I got a page over there. And we'll see. We'll see. I'm really enjoying the mixing thing. It's very cool.
Well, you quit life once to become part of Megadeth, and that worked out pretty good. So you may as well quit life a second time and start fucking mixing and making records again. So it's great.
You know, what really flipped me over was my wife died, cancer, and then there was COVID, and I was sitting in my empty house with all these people dying, and I thought, you know, if you're going to go do this thing, you better just go do it and don't wait for conditions to be perfect. And fortunately, I've got a lot of help from a lot of people. My sisters, I play in a band out here in Alamogordo, and my bandmates physically built the room I'm in. You know, they did the construction for me, which I didn't have the money for. You know,
Nice.
And then there's Dean Roberts from Leatherwolf, who's really helped me out a lot. First of all, he let me mix their album, and but he's also been helping me acquire all this cool hardware. Anyway, thanks to all those people, I get to do this now, and what I'm doing is working. You know, I can make stuff sound good now.
Hey, I want to bring up one thing, and it kind of goes back for a minute. You made a comment that today's records sound better, right? You know,
Yep.
And I would agree. There was a period where I love Pro Tools. I love digital. I love it. I love the sound of it. I think for metal records, especially, it's great. I love the ability to write and playlist and try different ideas and just all of that, the creative stuff that it allows us to do. But there's also this part of me where I always go back to P-Cells, in particular that record, because I was just listening to Killing Is My Business yesterday, and you know, we were just young and unbridled and out of control and on drugs on that record too. But and it's cool. It's a super fast, violent, killer record. But we really honed it in on P-Cells, right? We got it there. But I guess where I'm going with this, you know, the equipment and, you know, trying to capture a young band in the 80s like we were, budget's not totally affording, you know, P-Cells kind of started to help us afford that. There is this fine line between being able to make a great record, and I'll talk about probably metal more than anything, but even pop records and rock records. Where is the line of being able to make a great record that sounds, you know, vibrant and full versus capturing those performances like what we did on P-Cells? Because there is a combination to that, right?
Yeah. So what we did on P-Cells is what I did on every record I made, which is I put the whole band out there and looked for a drum track. Got the band to play together, play the songs, and look for something that felt great. Because once you've got that, then you can build on that. But at its core, and we never use click tracks. I mean, a couple of guys I recorded used click tracks. Chris Poland and his brother, they played the click tracks, but most of the folks didn't. And what I'm looking for is that, you know, is the feel and the excitement, and then getting the rest of the players to play to that and keep that to the end, you know? So yeah, I don't know. If I had to go make a record today, and I would do it the same way I did it back then. I would go in the studio and get those killer drum tracks, probably not with a click track, and try to get the excitement. Going back a little further, you know, like a generation before what we did, if you look at Zeppelin and the Stones and a lot of those bands, you know, they weren't using click tracks. They,
right.
you know, They were, and a lot of the stuff they did, they really kept all of it, you know, and that's why those records feel so good, you know, because they're really good musicians playing really well together. So
and you know, Jeff Young, we did So Far So Good So What together, we're in Kings of Thrash together. He's a real stickler about that you know, analog music is that's what connects with people. Digital music doesn't, because ones and zeros are not analog. You know what I mean? Ones and zeros. What are your thoughts on that?
So for me and the mixing, I've been here 3 or 4 years trying to get it to sound right. And what finally did it was a bunch of analog gear, my SSL compressor and my Neve. It's called a master bus transformer, but it's just a Neve analog color machine. You know, you drop it in there and you're in Neve world. And so there's some real magic in the analog that they still haven't quite figured out. They still can't. You know, I hear it. I know what it is now. And it's subtle, but it makes a big difference. On the other hand, you know, being able to have stuff in the digital domain and being able to do a mix and then come back to it, you know, a couple of days later and have the same mix there, right? Is really great. One of the things about Return to Metalopolis is it has a modern sound. It has the fidelity of records that are made today, but it was Chris and his brother playing live in that room. And there's you know, there's no amp sims, there's none of that stuff. You know, there was a click track. You know,
they were a little more musically. Yeah, I mean, you know, I remember Chris's brother Mark. He was playing in kind of a new wave band, and they were making him play to a click tracks and kind of. So I know those guys were a little more musically astute like that, you know. But I agree. But Return to Metalopolis was a, and you know, Chris would have never even been in metal had he not been in Megadeth. And then once he was in Megadeth, he did something very different with it. You know, he combined his style, his Chris Poland fusion with metal. And as it says, returning back to metal is basically what that title to me says. I'm returning back to metal here. But yet it's not a metal record. It has metal moments, but it's got these just beautiful soaring melodies and this stuff. And yeah, and he and Mark played great together as Eddie and Alex and Dime and Vinny, you know, as brothers do, as guitar players and drummers, right? There's a DNA thing there, you know.
So I think the analog stuff is great, and there's some magic in analog that the digital folks still can't quite emulate. There's a clarity. There's you know, my son's an engineer, and he said, well, there's always some level of resolution in your digital stuff. He goes, when you go to analog, the resolution is infinite. And so on some level, people can perceive that, you know. I thought that was a good explanation, but no, there's some magic there. I think you need to balance it, you know. But again, if I was going to go make a record, if the drummer played well without a click track, I'd go without the click track and go for the feel, and try to get a great, exciting drum track to build everything around, and do it that way. I don't know about, I don't edit stuff. If somebody sends me something, and you know, I'm not going to edit the guitars to make them all line up on the grid. You know, they can get somebody else to do that. So I'm kind of a little bit in both camps, you know.
Okay, very cool.
The thing we did when we made our record is I made you guys play it right. You know
that you did, and I remember very clearly recutting the bass, right? Because the rhythm takes were very good, and of course, on Killing Is My Business, what you hear, that's me, Dave, and Gar playing it together. We got one take, ready, count it off, let's go. That's it. I mean, we didn't go back. I didn't recut bass. Dave didn't recut guitar. With P-Cells, we did. You had us recut those things, mostly so that they just sonically sounded better. We could get better tones. Obviously, that was kind of the first one of my first experiences actually going back and overdubbing, now not playing to musicians in a room, but playing to these static drums that were up on the speakers, which is a very different experience.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I've made Megadeth records where I just played to a click. Dystopia, I played to a click. I didn't even play to drums. I just played literally to a click. That's me much more experienced in my recording career to be able to do that and make it kind of have a swagger and a swing and a feel to it. But at a young age that I was making, that record, in a real studio with a real producer, and all boats rise. All of our games were rising. That's a funny thing with Killing Is My Business. That was the first record me, Dave, Gar, or Chris had ever made. Dave had made a demo tape. With Metallica, but it was a demo. I'd made demos. Gar and Chris had made demos with the New Yorkers and various things. But Killing was the very first record that any of us had ever made. So regardless of any of our experiences elsewhere, and they were pretty vast, each of us had our own upbringings. Me in the Midwest playing the ballroom club circuit stuff at a young age. That record was our first time. So by the time we got to you on Peace Sells, that was our sophomore record. We were all growing together in our recording, in our recording career, which is a very different thing than being a live performer. That's I always say, being in the studio, you're in the music business. Being on stage, you're in the entertainment business. And they can be two very different things. Even though you may be playing the same songs, it's two very different things. And Andy Summers taught me that, our agent. Andy helped us get our deal with Capitol, and he kept saying, he goes, hey, it's showbiz, Junior, it's showbiz, and I was like W.C. Fields, it's showbiz, kid, hey, so but we learned a lot. We were all learning a lot, and again, you had more experience in the studio than we did, and that's what we needed. We needed a leader and someone who would help us rise up. So thank you for that.
You need to get the people in the studio. You need to make sure that when the artist performs, that it's going to sound good, that you're getting good stuff in those days on the tape. And you need an environment where the musicians are comfortable and they're able to focus on the music and play what they need to play and get the good performances. And then the sort of part about it that not everybody can do is knowing when it's good. Yeah, right. That one's the take. Knowing when it's right. And it's the same thing with mixing. With mixing, you need to know when to stop. Like, that I turned the knob far enough. That's it. I need to stop now. So, Peace Sells was really fun. I mean, I had a great time making that record.
I did too. Like I said, you kept us from being homeless. Big win right there. You helped us record our ideas, which we basically worked out not only in that rehearsal room, but out on the road. That was a big place where we worked a lot of that record on. That was our pre-production, was taking it out on the road. And then we would also make records. I remember the Risk record, even the Super Collider record. We went in the studio too soon. The songs were not ready. The record wasn't ready. And we got in there, we made those records, and then we went out on tour and went, oh, fuck, these songs are not connecting. Like, these do not sit next to Holy Wars and Symphony of Destruction. And you know what I mean? Like, these, and so I've had that experience with Megadeth as well, where, knowing you've got the goods and then the records that really underperformed and underdelivered. And it started with us, in the studio, whereas opposed to what you had, just sitting on that floor, you knew there was magic in that room. It's like, I got to record this band. That's a very different excitement. So, cool. Let's leave it there. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good one. See you, Randy.
See you. Bye-bye.